Well, hello, hello,
Hello, hello.
and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk with Leanne and Jason. So, for those of you that might forget, I'm Leanne. Hello.
And I am Jason. Hello, and this is Let's Talk.
This is a space where no topic is off limits. We discuss a whole range of things from well-being to resilience, leadership, money, relationships, mindset, and all with a foundation of emotional intelligence and neuroscience.
Absolutely. And as always, here at Let's Talk, we bring varied perspectives, real stories, and definitely honest conversations. Because the things we don't often talk about end up being the things that we need to talk about and that matter most in life.
Yeah. And so our goal here is really simple. It's to spark new ideas, to shift mindsets, and to give you practical tools that you can use in your leadership, but more importantly, in your whole life.
Yes. So whether you're tuning in today for inspiration, growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk. So, welcome back to Let's Talk. We're in the series of the art of intentional living. And so far, we've covered some really big topics. We've talked about the knowing doing gap, why we don't do what we want to do, the power of clarity and vision, getting very much in alignment. We also talked about values and making them apparent so we can actualize them, right? So rather than something that we just think about, they become something that we action. We then talked about energy because energy is the foundation over everything. We've looked at systems over motivation. So setting yourself up well with really good systems in place because motivation and willpower can often let us down. And we've talked about boundaries and self respect and having the ability to say no as a complete sentence. And that was always something that we need to work on. Well, I know I do. And last week we looked at the courage to be seen. So stop playing small, get yourself out there and play bigger. So we've had some great topics. And today we're going to look at bringing it all together in one of the most practical but high impact topics that we could tackle. And that is how do we make good decisions? Because decision making is one of those things that people often struggle with. Um, and here's the thing in truth, the sum of your life is the sum of your decisions, right? So if we make good decisions, we have a great life. And if we're not making great decisions, then it may not necessarily be a great life. Every relationship, every career, everything that we kind of view and tackle, every boundary that we set, every boundary that we break, every risk that we take, or even the risks that we avoid, all of that is based on the the decisions that we make. It comes down to that one simple thing about our choice. And in, our choices are so important. You don't drift into your great life, you decide it, right? You decide what your great life is. Um, and then you live your great life. But yet, most people have never been taught how to make decisions well. Um, and I see it a lot in myself sometimes, but also in the clients that I work with, where they kind of get into that analysis paralysis. So today we're really going to chat about that. And I think it's a really important topic because the better we can make decisions, the better we are as humans and the better we are as leaders.
Yeah, and Leanne, before I go into the next section of our conversation, I mean, it's interesting, you know, when you were saying how just kind of in the totality of life, right? We really haven't been taught, right? It's not something that technically they teach in school, or they, if when they do, they don't teach it really well. Um, and it also makes me think of like all the different variables, right? Like family dynamics, cultural dynamics, relationship dynamics and all that that affects kind of this sum of how you show up to make decisions.
Yeah.
Um, and those sometimes unhealthy boundaries that you put in place to like not let your decisions be the best that they can be.
Totally.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, you know, the input or the teachings that we learn about decisions are from our parents or families, and they probably haven't been taught to make them well either in lots of cases. So you've kind of got faulty machines you know, teaching faulty machines, so to speak.
Yeah.
So today we really want to kind of shine a light on how you can make decisions well, um,
Yeah.
without that the angst and the analysis paralysis that we can get into. Or what I see even more often, Jason, is people who won't make decisions at all, and they just
Hmm.
kind of live by default, right? Like whatever happens, I'll be good with, but they're not actually taking control of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then before you know it, like another 5 months, 6 months has gone by.
Yeah. And even not making a decision is a decision, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's a great segue into, why making decisions feel so hard sometimes. So what most people don't realize is that in the sum of a day, we make 1,000 decisions throughout our day. Some are automatic of like, okay, like, what do I want to wear? What do I want to eat? Which route do I want to take to work? Some things that have just become so hardwired, in the brain that they're just automatic decisions that you don't really have to spend a lot of energy on, right? But the ones that actually shape our life in in the larger picture, those are the ones that we as individuals agonize over, we avoid, don't make them at all, or hand to someone else because handing to someone else is easier. And why does that occur? Because when we make meaningful decisions, or in the concept of making meaningful decisions, like uncertainty is involved, right? We don't know how it will turn out, so that's why I think so many people just get into this hamster wheel of like the comfortable. Well, I don't know, I'm going to avoid I'm avoiding making this decision because I don't know the actual outcome, right? Trade-offs occur. So something has to be given up, right? I mean, I love asking that Peter Block question of, you know, what is something that's no longer serving you that you're willing to let go of to move to the next part of an initiative, the next part of life, etc. And so sometimes those trade-offs are there, and sometimes those things that feel comfortable and but they may be unhealthy or no longer serving you, that they do need to be given up, right? Then there's visibility. We talked about visibility last week. Others might see us get it wrong. Oh my gosh, no one likes to feel embarrassed or have that feeling of like, oh my God, I got it wrong in front of A, B, and C folks. Now they're going to think A, B, D, E, and F of me, right? And then there's identity, right? The choices say something about who we are as individuals. And a lot of times, a lot of external people make hardline judgments of when a decision is made of like, well, that's the way it is versus giving space and grace, right? So we don't struggle to decide. We actually struggle to decide and live with the new outcome. And sometimes that outcome might be a little in the gray area where is super scary. Um, So I'll say that again. We don't struggle to decide. We actually struggle to decide and live with that new outcome because of the decisions. So what do people do instead? Right? People start overthinking until that window closes where maybe it's a decision you have to make on a new opportunity, right? And it's like you get this analysis paralysis and window's closed, the job application is no longer open, right? Because you've been self-doubting yourself too much. Seek endless opinions and still feel stuck. I mean, there's sometimes, and I know you and Leanne, you and I have talked about this. It's like sometimes you just have to be there for people, given the space to vent. And it's just like, like I don't need to provide my opinion here, but sometimes they just seek and seek and seek endless opinions to feel validated. But at the end, they're still stuck, right? And then it's make the safe choice and quietly resent it. No one wants to feel that feeling of resent, but sometimes that happens. And so, a lot of people just tend to play safe and play in their little box that they just kind of move through life in and don't play bigger like we, talked about last week. And then they delay until circumstances decide for them. Right. And, like I've seen in a professional setting, right? Like sometimes, you just get such in self-doubt land that you don't decide, and then your management decides for you. And then you're like, and but sometimes it's having to live with what they decide when you could have stepped up, played bigger, excuse me, and actually, powerfully put forth your decision or your idea. So none of those are actually choosing. They are ways of actually avoiding the discomfort of choosing, right? So we know that growth only ever happens when you get comfortable with the uncomfortable. So before we move into the next section, I'll leave this part of the conversation with this: is indecision is a decision. It's just hands the power to someone or something else, instead of leaving that power in your hands and to have that confidence to powerfully make those decisions so that you can move to the next phase of whatever it is. And like we said last week, play bigger.
And so many things that you said in there, Jason, I can resonate with, especially around the avoidance, right? Like I know that I've spent time in all of those different things, seeking other people's views and opinions, or not making the decision at all and having it been made for me, and then having that resentment, right? Because I chose the safe option and not actually the one that was going to make my heart sing, right?
Yeah.
So I can see that we've all been in that position at different times, and we can maybe make some decisions really well and some not so well. And why is that? So let's have a look at the neuroscience. Um, and what's happening in the brain when we face big decisions. Because the truth is, we're always making decisions. We're making millions a day, but your brain is not a rational decision making machine. We think it is, but it's actually not. It's an emotional, energy conserving, survival focused organ that sometimes thinks logically. And I think that's a really interesting distinction, because we believe our thoughts and we think that they're rational, but they're not. Occasionally we have logic. The rest of the time we're in confusion and emotion and a whole lot of other stuff. And here's what actually is running the show, right? First and foremost, we've spoken about this in almost every episode. It's that threat response that shows up. And the reason it comes up is because any decision that involves uncertainty or risk or that potential failure option can activate the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, right? In that limbic region. It's the brain's alarm system. It kind of fires off and you know, warning, Will Robinson, warning, like it really kind of fires off this threat. And it stops you from being able to think clearly because we all of a sudden are going into this threat response. So our logical thinking isn't there. We often think reactively about the situation instead of thinking clearly, right? Like it's like, okay, we're kind of solving a problem, but we're not really. We're actually being very emotive. It stops us from evaluating options effectively. And what it does instead is helps us to avoid discomfort. So it's kind of doing its protection mechanism, but it's not, as we always say, its job is not to make us happy. It's to keep us safe. You know, we don't have that long-term view that we should have when we're actually doing decisions. What we're
Mhm.
looking for subconsciously is this immediate relief. Oh, I don't like the confusion. I don't like the fear. I don't like the risk that's associated. So we kind of do immediate relief instead of having that long-term view. And this is why under pressure, people really make key decisions that they regret later. You know, I
Mhm.
often talk about decision regret because we make a decision to ease the suffering now without really looking at what's actually best for me in the future. They're not irrational, they're actually dysregulated in the moment. And that's the key that we need to be mindful of because if we've got a dysregulated nervous system, we're not thinking rationally and logically. We're in this fight, flight, freeze mode, and our brain is just trying to keep us safe. So you can't think your way to a great decision from a dysregulated nervous system. We need to regulate ourselves, right? And actually think about it from that perspective. You know, so do what you need to do before making decisions. Regulate first. We say that a lot, right? Regulate first. And it's so important. The second thing that can come up from a neuroscience point of view is decision fatigue. And here's something that most high achievers don't actually account for. Their brain has a finite capacity to make good decisions, right? Because it's making decisions all day, every day. So every choice, big or small, uses mental resources. And by the time the evening comes or later in the day rolls around, the thinking part of your brain, that prefrontal cortex, your brain's rational um, powerhouse, is actually depleted. And that's why we can avoid the Tim Tam in the morning, but in the evening we eat the whole packet because because we've got decision fatigue, right? It also so it explains that evening impulse control or lack of impulse control later in the day, because um, when we're looking at things, our brain is actually fatigued. And then we say yes to things that we should decline. And we know we should decline it, but we no longer have the capacity to make that decision. It's also why, at the end of the day, we might snap at the people we love. Like we've been able to hold it together all day, but then again, by the evening, our brain is fatigued, and then our emotional responses come out instead of our logical responses. It's also um, impacts our sleep, right? So we scroll, you know, and we do different things, and then we're not sleeping well. And then that actually impacts our next day's capacity to make decisions. So the truth is that the quality of your decisions really does depend on the time of day that you make, right? It's why you see people doing purchase impulse. You know, they buy the things off Amazon at midnight or 10 o'clock at night. And then when it arrives, it's like, really? Did I need that? You know, my credit card bill is huge and I really don't need to do that because we have limited capacity later. We don't have the capacity to make those decisions because our brain is fatigued, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think people realize that that happens. I think they just think that they've got this infinite ability, right? But we've got to keep recharging the brain. And I just wanted to share a story about judges. So they did this survey on parole judges. So judges that release inmates from jail, right? If they go for a parole hearing. And what they've established is that most judges will allow parole for those that for the matters that they hear in the morning. After lunch, most judges then keep people in prison because the risk is high and their brain is fatigued. So it's easier to navigate the risk and to keep them in prison than to afford them parole. So, that's a big thing depending on the time of day. It's not that judges were trying to do that, it was the decision fatigue of making these big decisions, right? About whether somebody stays in jail or comes out of jail. And unfortunately, those that had afternoon hearings actually got the short end of the stick. Really sad.
Yeah.
So I think, we've got to think about things like this. Um, so that was number two, right? That decision fatigue. And the third part that really gets in the way is the social brain in decision making. Now, or we can, we can't ignore the social layer of our brain because we are social beings and we are constantly in environments that, our brain is asking, what will people think? Will I be judged for this? What's this going to make me look like? Will it make me look bad? Right? All of these thoughts are taking up brain space. And
Mm-hmm.
again, we're not trying to do it. We're not weak. These are evolutionary because we need to be part of the tribe in order to survive from our primal kind of instincts. Social acceptance matters, right? It really matters. It feels like almost a life or death situation. But when we're making decisions to manage other people's opinions of us, we're not actually making decisions aligned with our own values. We're making decisions based on the need to fit in. And that's not necessarily a useful way of making decisions. So when we're making decisions based on fear of judgment, right, they'll always feel hollow. Even when they look right from the outside or from the beginning, they'll actually feel hollow because we're not making them for the right reasons. We're making them for that external validation instead of for our own internal system. And I think that can get in the way a lot. Like, and I know I've been there. I've made decisions to please others or because I wanted to be liked or because I didn't want to rock the boat or whatever the case may be. And then you kind of want to kick your own ass after that, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
why did you do that? You know, that's not what you really wanted to do. But that
Yeah.
fear of being outed from the in group, um, yeah, I think we've all done it.
Yeah, it was interesting, Leanne, when you were talking about that threat response, and you were talking about that long-term view, in conflict of that immediate relief. From a strengths point of view, for those who are familiar with like the Gallup Strengths Finder, right? Like what immediately came to mind is for those who have high certainty, um, which is also part of the scarf model too, right?
Yeah.
You know, like I just so see that laser clear on how that threat response just ignites when there's a lot of unknown and there's a lot of gray and it's threatening that certainty of needing to know and needing to know super clear where like sometimes that just isn't the case, right? um so so and I'm sure there's many other strengths that are affected by that part of the threat response, but that was one that came into mind of those who have of high certainty, that how that can just raid at them.
And they're
Oh,
always going to make the safe choice or the less risky choice, right? Which isn't necessarily the best choice.
yeah, absolutely. And then, when you were talking about the fatigue part, it was interesting on the news the other day here in the US, on the evening news, they were talking about um, just the immense amount of increased social media scrolling and scrolling on the phone, but they were talking about teens, and that there's high scrolling between like 11 and I think it was like 11 and 1 or 12 and 2 or something like that, and then again at 4 a.m. in the morning. And so they were really like talking about it from a sleep point of view, and
Mm.
obviously lack of sleep, and never turning off is going to get you into fatigue. So, what it made me think is that when those teenagers, even in their developing years where they're so tired when they get up in the morning anyways, and this having teenagers,
Yep.
um, just on how much more their brain is fatigued because of that not switching off from social media and phones,
Yeah.
and technology.
Yeah. And not just teenagers.
Oh,
I was in a training room yesterday. There were probably 50 people, and all of them said, "I'm addicted to my phone at night. I doom scroll before I sleep." Like, and these are adults, anywhere from 25 to 70. Um, it's not just teenagers, but that's still fatiguing our brain. And then
yeah,
that impacts the decisions that we need to make the next day. Um, and 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 again, we might be able to make better decisions in the morning, but as the day progresses, our decision-making capacity is going to be impacted because of that.
yeah, absolutely. So with that, next I want to talk about how high performers are actually deciding, right? How they actually decide to make decisions. So let's look at this through the lens of what separates people who decide well from those who stay stuck. And, you know, it's not confidence, it's not the certainty, that we all think that it is, that would naturally come to mind, right? But it's a set of internal frameworks, ways of processing choices that become habitual. And I think, people, if they watched the 2 episodes ago, 3 episodes ago, when we talked about building systems, right? When you have those good foundational systems, it's amazing how they can come into play when decisions need to be made. Even at times when your motivation and your willpower is not high. Yeah. So let's break this down a little bit. So, framework number one is the values filter. And, we talk a lot about values. Leanna and I both use a lot of it, in coaching and just living into our own values each and every day as best as we can. But within this values filter, high performers, they always run into decisions. They always run their decisions through their values first, which is where, like with my coaching clients, that's always where I start. I always start with values, because if you don't know your values, then all this other stuff is going to be kind of in the muck and the gray, right? But if you're laser clear about your values, and I'm not saying that values don't change over time too, but if you're clear, you're going to be able to make better decisions, right? So I'll say that again, high performers always run their decisions through their value system. So what you need to ask yourself is a couple of questions. Does this decision align with what I said matters most to me? Right? With a follow-up question of, does this move me toward or away from the life I'm trying to build? And I know sometimes that can be a hard one, you know, especially depends on what's going on in life and all the et cetera but it's an important question. Does the decision, whether it's small, medium, or large, does it move me in the toward direction or in the away direction of what you're trying to create in life? Finish by the question, is this a yes to my future or a yes to my fear?
That's a big one.
That's a big one. Yes.
Because I reckon if people really analysed a lot of the decisions, it would be saying yes to the fear, not to the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Because, like we've said from the neuroscience, our brain is here to keep us safe. And a lot of times in the safety, there's a lot of fear running in there.
Mm.
And so a lot of times we make the decision in the safety zone, right? So I'll say that question again, because I think it's such an important question to restate. Is this a yes to my future or a yes to my fear? So with that, if a decision doesn't align with your value system, no amount of logic that you try to put into play will make it feel right in the long term. Right? It may satisfy you in the moment or in the short term. And I'll just have a little quick story. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine the other week, and we were talking about kind of career and kind of where she's feeling stuck and all this kind of stuff. And it was interesting because we were talking about kind of job categories, right? And I was like, just make on a sheet of paper, line down the middle, line across the top, to say jobs I am not willing to invest time in, that's not going to bring me into my future state that I want. And then jobs that I'm going to apply for, etc. And she brought up a good point. She was like, well, Jason, she was like, well, what about these kind of have tos sometimes? Like if I have to work at 7-Eleven, part-time, just to, absolutely make another column for that. Make the have tos, and what have to jobs are you willing to do? So because in here, like in the US, there's tons of people going through like career conversations. And, it's like, how is this making you feel? Like the jobs you're applying for, how is it going to make you feel in the long term? Is it going to make you feel fulfilled, satisfied, have your heart sing with joy? Or is it just going to be like, that was just another job that I took? Right.
Because I was scared.
Exactly. Because I was scared. Oh my gosh, it's like I don't meet every single part of the job description. Well, you don't have to. I mean, those are the all nice to haves. Obviously, there's the core, but right, a lot of companies write job descriptions to the nice to haves, right? So I'll say this again: if a decision that you're trying to make doesn't align with your value system, this is why you got to know your value system. No amount of internal logic or trying to logicate it, and that's probably a word I just made up, with friends or family will make it feel right in the long term of life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
So when your decisions match your values, you stop second guessing them. Second framework is the future self test.
Yeah.
And I'll let you speak to that, Leanne.
Yeah, and I like this one, right? The future self, because one of the most powerful questions that we can ask when we're facing a big decision is, will my future self thank me for making this decision? Like, will my future self thank me? Not my current comfort zone that feels safe, not what feels easiest to make right now, but the you of the future, right? The version of you in the future that you're trying to live into, that you're working toward, not the you of today. And I think it's such a powerful question. Will this decision, will my future self be happy with the decision that I made today? Would you look back and say, yeah, that was the right call? Right? And these are questions that you can kind of ask yourself, because when we're in it, we're only looking at this kind of space. And oftentimes the bias that kicks in around this space is distance bias, distance of the future. We're
Mhm.
not looking way out there, right? So we're looking at the here and now. But really, the decisions that we make today impact our tomorrows. So asking that question about your future self, would my future self be pleased or happy with the decision that I'm making today? And, or, you know, was that the right call? If I was to ask my future self, was that the right call? What would it say? So it's almost like you're reversing the process. If I don't make this decision, what does my life look like in 12 months? And if I
Mhm.
do make the decision, what does my life look like in 12 months? So if we can kind of not just do the pros and cons list for now, but actually look at this from 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, like putting yourself into that future state, you'll make better decisions, because our biases to feel comfortable now get eliminated when we're actually looking at it from a future state. And the brain is, we know that the brain is wired to avoid short term discomfort. So these questions actually stretch you into that long game, right? To make a better decision. So we're actually thinking about, well, what is the long game for me? Not what's going to make me feel comfortable now, but what is my future self going to be grateful for? And I often think it's a useful question to ask yourself, to ask people around you. Okay, you're struggling to make a decision. What decision are you going to wish you had made in 3 years' time? If you look back, right? Like those sorts of questions eliminate that procrastination and that safety, and allow you to step into something that might be bigger,
Yeah.
because we are looking at the long game rather than the self protection game of now.
Yeah. Also, Leanne, what just came to mind too is, when I was talking about people with high certainty, people with, and I can say this for myself, people who are recovering perfectionists really fall into this space where it's hard to make decisions, because if it's not perfect,
Yeah,
not every element is there,
yeah,
it's easier to put it on the back burner.
yeah. But
Yeah,
but would your future self be pleased that you did
exactly.
that?
Probably not. Yes. So the third framework that we want to give you is, and we've talked about this earlier in today's episode and in past episodes, is that taking the time to regulate yourself first, to self-regulate. And whether that's self-regulate, through the tool of box breathing, which we've talked about endless in different episodes, especially in like high pressured moments, right? Where it's like decisions need to be made fast. Sometimes it's just taking that 5 seconds to self regulate and then decide first,
Mm,
or I mean, decide second. So This one we see as one that is like a non-negotiable for folks. So, if you're in a heightened emotional state, stressed, anxious, feeling of overwhelm, angry, frustrated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you are not in a position to make a high quality decision. And, especially for high performers and people in high pressure positions, like this is key because a lot of times it's like, you're together with, let's say, the other executives in the room. You have an hour to make 5 decisions. And sometimes you can be in very emotionally charged states because of just the different dynamics in the room, right? So it's that self-regulation, taking that moment, whether that's 10 seconds to a minute, whatever time frame you have, just to recenter. So then you can move into that high quality decision making. So before you decide, regulate, or here's some ways that you can self regulate. Like I just talked about, taking a breath, slowing down in the moment, just centering yourself. If you have the time, step away from the noise, even if it's for 10 minutes, sometimes just going to get a coffee or taking a walk around the block, which is all accomplishable in 10 minutes if you're within close proximity of where you can do these things, right? And then ask yourself, am I choosing from fear or from values? And I think sometimes this is where, when you get into the rhythm where high performers will actually do this a little bit better, is they'll actually ask the question, right? Because there's a level of maturity there, or emotional maturity that they've developed over time, where they can say, let me ask myself. And that's why I do so much of the values work at the beginning, because if you don't know your values, you're not going to be able to ask this question. Yeah. And you're not going to be able to get an answer from it. Right? And then if you even have a larger space of time, sleep on it when the stakes are high. Like if you have that space, or if you have that power and authority to say, let's look at this tomorrow. Let's just all sleep on it. And depends on where your power of influence is. Sometimes you can do that, and sometimes you can't. So those are some tips on how to regulate in the moment or over different spaces of time. And we just want you to know that you're not in the business as a human being to make perfect decisions. Because I have yet to come across yet a perfect decision when I reflect back, right? But you're actually in the business of making clear ones. And clear ones will have the messiness sometimes. But very few are going to be in that perfect, like everything is going to go to the plan without a hitch. So I'll just say that again, you're in the business of, or you're not in the business of making perfect decisions. You're in the business of making clear decisions. So from that, clarity comes after regulation, not before it. So in order to make those clear, sound decisions, you need to be self-regulated. And if you're self-regulated, then you're going to be able to make the clear decisions, and you can't do the opposite.
And the importance of regulation, right? And asking that decision. And even if you're not clear on your values, you can still ask yourself, am I making this decision based on fear? Right? Or am I making it on possibility? And even that in itself is a great question, because if you're regulated, you'll know the answer. I remember through some massive decisions that I had to make, people would ask me questions and I would say to them, just give me a second. And I would literally close my eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and see what arose, right? And then what arose was always the best decision, because by taking the breath and closing my eyes and checking in, then I knew that whatever came up then was actually the right decision to make, because it wasn't about reaction and it wasn't about fear. So it's okay to do that, right? You might not think that it's okay, but people will actually value you taking those micro moments to check in and be
Mhm.
clear about the decision that you're making. So I just wanted to double click on that because I think it's so important. We don't spend enough time in this space of regulation, or especially around decision making. And especially when you've got, high pressure, high jobs, lots of decisions to make, those milliseconds can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
The next framework I want to share with you is the 10-10-10 method. And this is a really simple method, but again, very powerful. It's a tool that was created by Susie Welch. And what she says is that when you're facing a decision, ask yourself, how will I feel about this in 10 minutes? How will I feel about this in 10 months? And then how will I feel about this in 10 years? And so again, you're creating that space between you and the decision and getting out of that, need for safety in the comfort zone right now. It immediately breaks you out of the urgency in the moment, right? That of, okay, I need to make this decision now. Yes, you need to make it now. But if we can ask ourselves what impact that's going to be in 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 years, then 10 months, all of that sort of stuff, we're then reconnecting you to what actually matters across time, as opposed to just feel safe in this moment. And if we
Mhm.
can attach to what matters across time, we're going to make better decisions by asking these questions. It's simple. These things are very simple. The hard part is remembering them. So, in the decision, because most decisions feel enormous right now. They feel all consuming. But if we look through the lens of a 10-year kind of trajectory, then it doesn't feel so enormous. It feels like it's a blip in the road. And I bet if you look at some of the decisions that you've made in your past that felt enormous, and you look back now and think, what was I worried about? That was actually not so enormous, right? Because time has passed and we're not in the emotional soup of it. So again, the questions are, how will this decision land? Like, how will it be? How will I feel about it in 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 months, 10 years, right? So it's the 10, 10, 10, 10, 4 tens that I like to ask. And then really kind of check in on the answers, because how I feel in 10 minutes may be very different to how I'd feel in 10 days, and almost unrecognizable to how I'd feel about it in 10 years.
Yeah. Love that 10-10-10-10.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard of that. But it's before our discussion today, it's actually a pretty simple framework,
Yeah.
uh, you know, like to remember. So the last framework that we want to talk about is done is better than perfect.
I even
Like I
like to say done is better than good. You know what I mean? Like, just do it.
just do it and grow from there,
Yeah.
right?
Learn. Yeah.
Learn. So here is one of my perfectionists and overthinkers. which is many of us, when we really get in tune with ourselves, right? Is that high performers understand that a good decision made now beats a perfect decision that's never made at all, right? Along with you can choose or you can course correct once you once you're in motion. And we all do that all the time. We're course correcting because we're like, okay, we made this decision, but it's not, for today's dynamics, like we need to pivot in this way or whatever, right? So it's that good decision versus the one that's never made, that's perfect. Course correcting along the way once you're in motion. And if you wait for certainty, it's waiting forever. You know, just do it, just go, just get it done. Like I heard earlier, I think it was at somewhere at the end of last year, is like done is the new perfect. You know, um, and once it's done, you put it in motion, and because everything right in life starts with an idea and a decision. I mean, this podcast started with an idea and the decision to do it, and know that we were going to be messy along the way, and
Imperfect, flawed, all of those things, but do it anyway.
yeah. And look, I mean, we're already at episode 29, So imperfect action teaches us more than perfect planning ever will. You know, like I've thought even back in my own career at different times where it's just like, okay, get out of the planning, Jason. Just do, like, just put it into motion. But it was that perfectionist part of me that wanted to have everything right, and so there would be no mistakes, right? There would be no like falling down and having to dust myself up and get back up. But so that's an insight that I've had both individually on a personal level and on a professional level too, is stop the analysis paralysis, stop the over planning. Like you get your planning to a certain point and then you just got to go do, you know and then course correct along the way. So with this,
Work.
you don't.
As sorry, Jason, I was just going to say, and if it's not right, what the lessons that you learn from that are magnificent, right? We,
Yeah.
I say this all the time because you just spoke to that, but I often say, when the going's good, we learn nothing. It's through the trials, the tribulations, the trying and failing, the attempts that didn't work, the that we actually learn good stuff that helps us
Yeah.
in the future. So, the only people who um, don't go through those kind of things are people who are stepping out or they're either in the ground. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Life is full of surprises, full of pivots and shifts. And if we can build the plane as we're flying, we're actually working in motion. But if we're waiting for everything to be perfect before we even test it, we're never going to test it. We're going to stay on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that's where it's like, when you were saying if like something, you made a decision, you get to this certain part and it's not working, well, that's when you make new decisions,
Yeah.
that are imperfect, you know. Um, so great piece of advice there, Leanne. And so to kind of end this part is that you don't need more information. What you need is more trust within your own self,
Yeah.
to know that, hey, I can go out there and I can make a powerful decision. It may be imperfect, but that's okay. And who knows where it 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 can blossom into.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And I love the word blossom, right? Because we do. We blossom, you know. So let's just have a quick chat about the hidden decisions that kind of control our life. They shape everything we do, right? And here's something that a lot of people don't actually talk about or don't think about enough. But it is that the most important decisions aren't always the big, dramatic, life-changing ones. They're actually the small, quiet ones that you make every day, that can get in the way of some of the big things that you're trying to do. And these could be things like the decision to speak up or stay silent around something that really matters to you, right? Little decisions, big impact. The decision to rest or to push through. You know, like a lot of people will push through and push, and then they hit a wall and collapse because they're not listening to their body. And I often say to people, if you don't listen to the subtle signs and rest, your body will shut down and force you to at some
Mm.
level, right? So you need to kind of be mindful of this. They're little quiet decisions. They're not all massive, but they have a big impact. The decision to address something or to let it build, and then the kind of it gets bigger and bigger and bigger inside you. Like just address it, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. The decision to show up fully or hold back. It feels safer to hold back, but what impact is that having in your life? Or the decision to invest in yourself or put it off, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm a big one in investing in myself by way of education, by way of books that I read, by way of, and then I sometimes get uh, uh, apprehension afterwards, right? Like, oh God, I've just spent that money, like blah, blah, blah. But what greater investment than your own self and your own evolution? Really?
Mhm.
Little decision, big impact. These decisions don't feel big in the moment. Sometimes they just feel like something small. Oh no, I won't say anything. But they are profound because the micro daily habits that we have around decisions and around the life that we're building dictates whether you're living your life intentionally or by default. And the key really is to live your life with intention, not just to kind of live it by default, by people pleasing, by doing all the other stuff, by playing small, by being comfortable in the moment and not taking those big steps. Intentionality is bigger, but it's also so fulfilling. So we really need to think about those small decisions because if we make the small ones well, then we're going to make the bigger ones well as well, right?
Mhm.
Because one of the biggest lessons in my life around decisions, and I can talk to this, is when my marriage broke down. Right? It was a massive thing. I was in pain and suffering deciding what to do. And for a long time, I stayed and made the decision from fear. And the fears were genuine, proper fears, fear of getting it wrong. What if I make the wrong decision? Fear of, oh my God, am I going to be alone now for the rest of my life? Fear of, what are other people going to think of me? Fear of being a single mum with 3 kids. There were all of these fears that were valid concerns. So I stayed and stayed and stayed in a situation that wasn't great. But what I learned once I was on the other side of it was that the decisions that I was most afraid to make were actually the ones that set me free, right? But I couldn't see that before. I had to kind of look in hindsight. And I often say, I wish hindsight was foresight. Like, I wish we got those learnings before we make the decisions. But unfortunately, we've got to go through the yuck and then we can look back and go, oh, that was great. They were the decisions that set me free, but they were terrifying in the moment. And I know I'm not the only one that's gone through that. There are many before me and many after me. But when we've got big emotions attached, we're usually coming from fear. And I really had to ask myself, if nothing changes, and this is the way it's going to be for the next 5, 7, 10 years, what does my life look like? And that was the decision that allowed me to kind of make the move that I needed to make, because I wasn't sitting in the, oh my God, now. I was actually, well, who's the future me and what does that look like? And what does the future look like for my kids? Right? That was a better decision as opposed to, shit, am I going to be able to feed them every day if I'm a single mum with 3 kids? So putting myself in the future is what helped. And what I looked at and what I noticed in hindsight was that's where my freedom came. So trusting yourself is a skill. And like all skills that we have, it's built through practice. So through making small decisions, from making big decisions, from sitting with discomfort of the outcome, from sitting with the unknown, and learning that you can handle whatever it takes. And you know how I know you can handle whatever it takes and whatever comes? Because you have. To this moment, you have survived everything that you've gone through. And that will continue into your future. Whatever shows up, you have the capacity to overcome and to learn from and to pivot around and to adapt because you've already done that till this moment. So self-trust is built by isn't built by thinking. It's actually built by deciding and then surviving the outcome. Right? We have to survive the outcome. So that's really the key, right? Make the decision knowing that you will survive the outcome because you already have to this point.
Yeah. Love that. So before we go into our favorites of takeaways and top resources, let's do a little bit of real talk reflection. So this coming week, I want you to sit with these 4 questions. Question 1, what decision have I been avoiding? And what's the real reason I'm avoiding it? Real being the key word there. Followed by the next question of, am I making this choice from my values or from fear or judgment? And we talked a lot about that earlier in today's conversation. Thirdly, what would my future self tell me to do right now? So if you even look at that 10, 10, 10, 10 method, right? What is your 10 minutes from now, 10 weeks from now, or 10 days, 10 weeks, and 10 months, and 10 years from now? Like, what is your future self telling you, right? Followed by the last question is, if I trusted myself completely, what would I choose? And I think that's a big question, right? Because to trust yourself completely takes it takes something to trust yourself completely. But if you did, what would you choose?
Yeah. Great questions. And again, journaling these could be really helpful to see what comes up. And I'm going to set a challenge. So hopefully you will say challenge accepted. But the challenge I want to leave you with today is to identify one decision you've been sitting on, procrastinating on, like just one, and run it through your values filter and ask your future self, and really ask your future self and regulate yourself first to make that decision. And I think that actually I should have started with that. Regulate yourself first, right? Then run it through your value system. Then ask your future self, right? Run it through your future self. And then decide. Not because you're certain, but because you trust yourself enough to find out and to figure it out. because confidence is not the absence of doubt and fear, right? It's the decision to act despite it. And I think we spoke to that last week also when we talked about feel the fear and do it anyway, right? So
Mhm.
confidence isn't about not having the fear. The fear's always going to be there. It's part of our mechanism to keep us alive. But
Yeah,
decide and do it anyway, despite the fact that you might still be fearful. Because on the
yeah,
other side of that is where our freedom lies.
exactly. And I think the totality of today's conversation really aligns with that knowing doing gap,
Yeah,
which was our very first one, I believe, in this series.
yeah.
Um, so if you haven't watched that one, watch that one as well, because I think folks can see that it's the indecisiveness that falls a lot of that gap part of the I know what I need to do, but actual doing it,
Mm,
because the actual doing it takes some decisions in order to get there.
yeah.
So, with that, we will move into our top three takeaways and top resources. Yep. Okay, so our top three tips from our conversation today is one, always remember that your brain is wired for safety, not great decisions. So just as almost what Leanne ended on is regulate first, then decide. Followed by our second tip, which high performers use their values and their value system and their future self as a compass, not just logic. And when people, which people probably are, well, what do I consider my future self? Well, we're always our future self, right? It's like 2 minutes from now is our future self, right? So, you can do it in a short time frame or a longer time frame, right? Followed by the third tip of today's conversation is the life that you want is built through small, consistent choices and decisions, not one perfect decision. Because in my book, there's never a perfect decision. There's
Ever.
always be some messiness that goes along with it, right? Or some part of it in the gray. So just remember that the life that you want to build is built through small, consistent, over the pendulum choices, not the big audacious perfect decision that you think exists out there.
Thank you, Jason. And some
Welcome.
of the resources that we have for you are a couple of books as usual, some TED Talks and a YouTube video. The first book, Decisive, by brothers Chip and Dan Heath. This book is really interesting because it's research backed, and you know that we love research and we love the science, right? It's a framework for making better decisions in any situation. But what it does, it talks about the four villains of decision making and then gives readers the tools to overcome them, really clear tools. It's highly readable and immediately applicable. So it's a great book to look at the villains that get in the way and have some strategies for how to overcome them. The next one is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And this is a really interesting book as well because it talks about the two systems we have for decision making, right? This is highly neuroscience backed. So we've got that quick reflex decisions that we make, and then we've got the slow brain where we really kind of work through decisions, right? So we can make fast and emotional versus slow and rational. And every decision we make is either through one of those lenses. So it's essential reading for anyone who wants to understand how decisions are made and why we make them the way they do. So thinking fast and slow. Then obviously we've spoken to this, the 10-10-10 A Life Transforming Idea by Susie Welch. And we've spoken about this framework today in our conversation, but it really it's a beautiful tool. It's simple for bridging long-term perspective into everyday decision making. So, putting that distance in there to get past the fear of today, it's perfect for perfectionists and overthinkers, um, because let's face it, we're all a bit that way. So it's a great book to read. And The Art of Choosing by Sheena uh, Ignat. I'm not sure how to pronounce that surname. My apologies. But this is a fascinating look at how we make decisions and what they reveal about us. So it actually, again, blends neuroscience, psychology, and cultural insight to show that choice is not just rational, that it's personal, deeply, deeply personal, and deeply, deeply emotional. So you can cut yourself some slack, right? That's the key. Then obviously we have some TED Talks for you. We've got one from Dan Early around are we in control of our own decisions? Which is again, it's an entertaining and eye-opening kind of TED Talk, and it shows how predictable irrationality drives our choices. Predictable irrationality, not rationality. So I think it's a bit of fun to watch. And then there's one by Ruth Chang around how to make hard decisions, which explains how hard choices shape our identity, not just our outcomes. So it's powerful. It's a powerful reframe from anyone who's been paralyzed by fear around those big decisions. And then The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And this one is more, um, it talks about why more often or why options more often lead to worse decisions, right? So the more options we have, the worse sometimes our decisions can be and the less satisfaction that we can have. So again, this one really highlights that whole concept around decision fatigue and the freedom that comes with actually making decisions with constraints and putting yourself into the future. So again, very good short TED Talks that you can watch. And then we've got the How to Make Better Decisions by Andrew Huberman. And this is a YouTube video, which is again neuroscience backed tools for improving decision making, including the role of sleep, of stress, of dopamine, all of these things that we talk about often in our conversations, but with a particular focus around the choices that we make. So, if I can leave you with one thing again, that challenge is what's one decision you've been sitting on, right? I really want you to regulate. I want you to put it into the future. I want you to run it through your values. And then I want you to take action. And if you're happy to, drop us a line in the comments because we'd love to see what you made possible this week once you finally choose.
Absolutely. So we're finally at episode 30 for next week, which is the last full week of May already. So episode 30 is going to be on money, meaning, and alignment, building wealth without losing yourself. So it's going to be a rich conversation that Leanne and I are going to have a lot of great commentary and tips and tricks and tools for you. So it'll be next week, Wednesday, May 27th, in the US at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, along with happening Thursday, May 28th in Sydney at 9:30 a.m. ASET time.
Thank you. And yeah, you're right, Jason. This one is particularly close to my heart. And I think it's going to be, again, one of the most important conversations that we can have in this series because money matters create the biggest problems for most people. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Absolutely. And then this is the rest of the episodes through the remainder of middle of June. And I think we're ready then to close out.
Absolutely.
So, get right. Okay, so like I said, next week's episode is money, meaning, and alignment, building wealth without losing yourself. And um, and with that, thanks for joining us for today's conversation on aligned decision making, how high performers choose with confidence.
So we hope that it sparks something new for you. You know, we've given you some tools and strategies, some insight and a fresh perspective. Um, or even just a question now around what am I not deciding on that's going to give me freedom in the future. So hopefully you've got some stuff now that's worth exploring and implementing to make your decision making process easier for you. So we don't get caught up and twist in the wind and suffer through the process.
And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple: to have the conversations that matter and to remind you you don't have to figure out this complicated, ever so busy thing called life alone. We're here to have the conversations beside you and to give you some tips, tricks, and tools that you can lean on to live a more intentional life.
Yeah. So, like always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please like it, subscribe, share with a friend, and keep the conversation going with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible,
So, let's talk
with real conversations,
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
everyone.